There's actually some brain cells that have up to 2 million mitochondria per cell. 65% of every commercial on TV is now from a pharmaceutical company. So they freaking own our media.
Seed oils is for cars or for robots, but not for human consumption.
I did psilocybin when I was 12. My parents had a High Time magazine. He read about it and like, we're gonna go pick these mushrooms.
My fellow travelers, as you know, there are many ways to the top of the mountain. And the top of the mountain can manifest itself in a plethora of ways. One way is the fitness realm, right? And how does your fitness journey look when you walk your way to the top of the mountain? And along the top of the mountain, you have to realize that there's multiple paths. And along these paths, you may meet cool, interesting individuals that perhaps have a lot to say and a lot to impart in terms of data sets. What's a data set? A data set is a piece of information that if one prompts or taps into can impact the course of your life. So along my journey to the top of the mountain, in terms of my health, mind, spirit, odyssey, I've come across a lot of cool individuals. And one individual I've come across is Dr. John Lieurance, and it is a pleasure to have you today with us. I like to call him Dr. Blue because I actually came across him with his very genius idea of a concoction of different substances that help cleanse, detoxify the eye, and methylene blue was one of them. And methylene blue is something I've actually been diving into the last few months, and I have been cycling on and off. And I've noticed a massive difference. So when it comes to substances, when it comes to research, I always think it's good to be able to tap into individuals that have those data sets because they've spent time, energy, sweat equity, thought equity, research equity. So it's kind of like being able to absorb the information in a distilled manner from a person who spent a long time studying it. So that's one way I came across you. The other way was, at the beginning, it looked a little bit interesting, then very curious, but it was Dana White. You did a Cranial release on him, and he was talking about like all the benefits of how well he could breathe. And then I saw other people doing it, and they totally messed it up. And I realized it was one of those things where it's a little more sensitive and delicate, and you really have to do it with the right person.
Yeah.
So, like, that's how I came across you.
Right.
And then we connected, and then we did the protocols. And guys, I can't stress enough. Not only, it doesn't really hurt, but not only the benefits in terms of oxygenation and breathing, which we all know is crucial and pivotal, but also the correlation with strength, balance, based on each individual, because each individual is different. So explain a little bit, like I thought it was very curious because we did a few tests with devices and everything, and the strains or the weaknesses that I felt personally that I didn't convey out loud were very noticeable when you saw it so let's talk about that, because that was very fascinating.
Well, I imagine, there's going to be a fair amount of people watching this that are interested in improving their performance in many ways, whether it's mental, emotionally, and then there's physically, right? So are you looking to have more command over your emotional state? Are you looking to have more reach into your brain function where you can figure things out more rapidly and connect with people and be more productive in business, and thrive in a business situation where you're having meetings, and you have that sharp mind? And then physically being in the gym, obviously both of us are very interested in maintaining our physical appearance and our physical body and the health and vitality of our body, go to the gym. And this is very important because not only do you appear good, and a lot of people will find you more inviting and you have a physical health and vitality that's radiant, and people want to be around that. But also it's a matter of, how well your body's aging, right? And so if you're 20 years old, and you're like looking like you're 40 or 50, you might not be taking care of your body, right? If you're overweight, So we're going to be talking about a number of things here over the next hour or two.
Yeah.
And we're going to be diving into some things that might be a little bit more obscure, and some things that not so obscure, but putting it in context so that you can take some of this knowledge and you can move forward and actually get command of some of these things, because it all boils down to one simple thing, which is the cellular life force, which comes from the cell within the cell called mitochondria, right? And this is also, people reference this as metabolism, right? And so our metabolism is our ability to extract energy from food, right? It's our ability to take and, through chemistry within the cell, take food and oxygen and basically make something called ATP, right? And so I'm gonna get a little technical, right? And this is fairly basic within science, but if this is new to you, it's gonna be a little technical, but
very important, guys, so pay attention.
So mitochondria's job is to move electrons, right? In fact, they call it the electron transport chain. So just imagine within this small little vesicle, which there's hundreds, thousands, and sometimes millions of them in each cell, and it depends on how metabolically demanding that cell is. In other words, like the brain, 2% of the body weight, 20% or more of the energy demand. So that's incredible, right? So there's actually some brain cells that have up to 2 million mitochondria per cell, but the average cell just has like a few hundred, right? And so within these mitochondria, they're moving electrons, but they can also use light, which is something we're going to get into a little bit later with methylene blue, which is why it's so incredible.
Yeah.
And that's why the sun is so important, right?
Yeah.
And I think we should definitely get into talking about some lifestyle things that are going to support you extracting energy efficiently, so that you can go out there and have your best life, right?
So going off of that, because I agree with you, when people think about biohacking, people think about like taking shortcuts, this and that. I think about optimization, and bioavailability, like all these what they quote unquote hacks. They're not hacks. They're like, this is one of the most optimal ways to do it. It's not, I'm gonna cheat myself out of this to get.
Maybe let's change the word to finesse. Biofinessing.
Biofinessing.
Well, you know what? That's actually
you should
really
coin it.
good.
I like
biofinessing.
Biofinessing, because but the issue with biofinessing is you actually have to understand and study the why behind something, and not just, cold plunging is great, so I'm gonna do cold plunge. Because I can tell you, hypes come and go. I see people that have super dry skin that, in my personal opinion, shouldn't be bathing themselves in super cold water because it's burning their skin. They don't hydrate it. So it's kind of like, biofinesse it, like use common sense a little bit.
I've been searching for a word. I've been in conversation with people at biohacking conferences and so forth. I'm like, we got to come up with a better word, and literally that just came out of my mouth.
I like it.
And I'm like, I'm really feeling it.
I
think that when you hack something, it's like you're kind of getting away with something that you shouldn't get away with, or you're getting a shortcut.
Yeah.
We're not going to be necessarily talking about shortcuts in the sense, but these are actually primitive strategies that we used to experience when we were before all the luxuries of modern civilization. And this actually ties really beautifully into some of the cranial conversations.
Okay.
Because all of our skulls are collapsing, right? This is something that Weston Price, who's considered the father of the raw food movement, this guy was a dentist, and he went all over the world, and he wrote this book called On Physical Degeneration.
Okay.
And they have the Price Pottinger group out of California that basically teaches people that they should be eating raw, mostly fruits and vegetables, right? And raw milk, right? And raw meat, and so they even did studies. So they call it the Price Pottinger group because Pottinger kind of on the shoulders of Weston Price did some studies with cats, which is really, really interesting, and we can talk about that. But kind of back to Weston Price, is he noticed that Aborigines had these wide skulls, right? And they didn't have to have their teeth removed. Like we have a society where it's normal to have wisdom teeth removed to make room because you have a smaller skull structure. But so we're going to take the wisdom teeth out. We're going to leave that skull structure collapsed. Those airways, right? So I've got a new book that's probably may even be out by the time this podcast comes out.
What's the name of the book?
Airways.
Airway.
Right? And so Airways is important because we're meant to breathe through our nose. We're not meant to breathe through our mouth. And what happens when we have inflammation, it shows up in the nasal passage. And so we don't breathe either at all through the nose, and you know who you are, right? You wake up in the morning, your mouth is dry. Yeah. Maybe you know you have sleep apnea. Maybe you've got chronic sinus issues. And then you have this like cesspool of infection in your sinus.
Yeah.
What's the quickest way to the brain? Ask a cocaine user, right?
The
Through
nose.
So do you think that these microbes are outgassing, and they outgas something called endotoxins, which is the most inflammatory substance known to man, right to the brain. And that will give you brain fog. That will affect your exercise. That will affect your mental clarity, your mood. You know, one of the first things that starts to happen when our brain goes south is we have depression and mood, right? And then you're searching for answers for that really don't serve you, like something like an SSRI.
Yeah.
Or drugs or whatever it might be. You know, there might be risky activities that you might be, and it's just because you're trying to medicate yourself from a condition that could easily be remedied by fixing it at its core root cause, which is really what we try to do in naturopathic medicine. Also, I'm a chiropractic neurologist, so my original training was in chiropractic, and just like in medicine, you can become a neurologist. I've gone through the schooling to become a neurologist. And so within this field of neurology, we call it functional neurology, our skill set is to allow people and provide people the opportunity to recover without drugs and surgery, because ultimately the brain thrives on activation, right? The brain wants, so it's like,
can you get into activation itself? What do you mean by activation?
Yeah, so fuel and activation. So we're going to talk about fuel, right? How do you get the best fuel, right? Proper fuel that's sustainable, not something that you just do once in a while that gives you like a boost, but like ongoing, solid fuel where you have that deep mental clarity. You can understand complex
So like
things.
A new baseline.
Right.
Okay.
But activation would be the learning, right? The neuroplasticity. So an example would be if I asked you what a strawberry tastes like, and you know what that is, right? You can recall that. But if I had, could you give a pill to somebody so that they would know what a strawberry tastes like?
No chance.
There's no way, right?
No chance.
Because there's so many complex things. There's the texture of the strawberry. There's the flavor, right?
Yeah.
There's the smell, because we actually taste a lot of things through our nasal passage and our smell. And then there's the we like to eat them cold or not cold. So there's all these aspects of that strawberry that are just getting integrated into the brain. And so what our modern medical world is based on a molecule that they can get a patent on, so that they can protect their interest to be able to spend billions of dollars on TV, right? 65% of every commercial on TV is now from the pharmaceutical company.
Not surprised.
So they freaking own our media, right?
Yeah.
And so the bias of what you're seeing on TV is just overwhelmingly based on these molecules that have been patented. So if you have something that's natural, probably multitudes times more effective and safer, you're not going to hear about that, right?
Correct.
Unless you're listening to us right now.
Correct. So if basically God or the creator patented every single piece of free natural resources that we have, he'd be a decatrillionaire and basically be ripping everybody off. But it's free.
Well, the beautiful thing, if that were to happen, then we might actually be hearing about things like methylene blue or melatonin or breath work or yoga or diet. Like you're not hearing that on TV. Like you watch you watch a football game, you're going to hear about drugs, and Red Bull and like different things that really are more fashionable and monetizable. That's the main thing. It's what they can monetize to recoup their money on that advertisement, right? Yeah. So you really want to be wary about how you're being brainwashed, because you all are, right? Especially, I'd say that the younger generation, the older generation, we all are being completely brainwashed. They know exactly how to create those scenes of people running through a field and like life is beautiful and things that we all want, and they're anchoring that with talk to your doctor, right? And so with regards to medicines, there's a difference between a medicine and a drug, right? Mm-hmm. So a medicine is something that should benefit the body but not have harm to the body, right? And when you look at a substance like methylene blue, the patents run out, but it predates the FDA. So literally, methylene blue was one of the first drugs to be grandfathered in with the FDA. It didn't even have to go through trials because it was already considered incredibly safe. And in the late 1800s, they discovered that it cured malaria, which was the biggest need at the time. Because you think about England and the United States, they were basically looking to take over all these different territories. You know, there's a lot of land grabs for areas that they could take, that they could take oil, right? And you hear stories about these companies going into these rural areas and taking and it's just like what happened with the Indians, the Native American Indians, right? This happens all over the world.
Happens all over the world.
And these corporations go in and just destroy the environment where they're mining, whether it's gold or whether it's in the lands, or if they're trying to extract oil. They absolutely they create such a toxic land afterwards. Things can't grow, that people get sick.
Have you seen what's been going on with like the Amazon?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. So these things are the byproduct that are providing us the creature comforts that we have today.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we're kind of getting a little bit off track. So methylene blue.
Can you talk for the people at home that have no idea have never heard of methylene blue? Just give us a little synapse for people.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about like the mitochondria, right? And so the mitochondria's job is to move electrons. We talked about that.
Yeah.
And through the process of moving electrons, it creates heat. Okay. And that the body takes that heat and makes a chemical energy called ATP. And that's what fuels everything in your body. You really want to pay attention to that. You want that to be as robust as possible, but you also want to be able to buffer the effect of that, because what happens is if you have too much of that energy production without the quenching of the oxidation, which is the antioxidant, then what you get is you get too much oxidation, which leads to sclerosis, buildup of plaque. You have degenerative situations that happen with the brain. Most diseases have some sort of an effect from this over-oxidation, right? Plus, there are a lot of things in our food that are incredibly oxidative, like seed oils, right? Yeah. And this is something I think we should at least touch on.
Seed oils is basically for cars or for robots, but not for human consumption, due to the issue that they're not pressed, right? It's a whole rancid process of bastardization, of adding chemicals to change the odor. Very cheap to make, easy to pitch, easy to sell, pure propaganda. If you have half a neuron, try something else. I like telling people process of elimination. Just eliminate it, see how you feel. Try something else. See
it's
how you
really
feel.
hard though, because all restaurants have it. So it's very difficult to eat out.
So what do you do when you go and eat out and all that?
Butter. Yeah. Butter, coconut oil is a good alternative. It's hard to get restaurants to, a lot of them don't have coconut oil.
They don't.
But they all have butter, right?
Yeah.
So ask if your food can be cooked in butter or grilled. And also all sauces, like any salad dressings or sauces typically have canola oil is the big, big thing that you'll see in a lot of, and what that's doing is it's literally clogging your ability to make energy, and it's getting into something called the cell membrane, which is the wrapping of the cell, and this allows this toxic residue basically causes an incredible amount of inflammation, and it's important to understand how we make energy and how that's suffocated with inflammation. And why any conversation that we have really is relating to minimizing the inflammatory response in the body so that you can have the most robust production of energy, right? So kind of back to this idea with methylene blue. So we talked about moving electrons. We talked about how that creates heat and that produces ATP. What methylene blue does is it seems to have an affinity into the mitochondria. And the reason that they use it, they actually use it to stain like brain tissue and different types of tissues, because the different cells will be darker blue or lighter blue based on how many mitochondria they have. So it's easy to kind of visualize things within the body, and so they used it as a staining agent.
Almost like a map or blueprint, because it gives you an idea in a way.
Totally.
With the staining. Wow.
Yeah. So
who came up with that idea, like to track it with the methylene blue?
Yeah. Well,
that's smart. Like I don't know.
There's a number of staining agents that they used, and so at some point they discovered that, and so Paul Ehrlich in late 1800s wanted to find a cure for malaria, and so he sits down at his desk with a microscope, and he puts the parasite that carries malaria onto the slide, right? And then he adds methylene blue to start his testing procedure, where he's then going to add different medicines to see what kills that parasite, and he could see it because the methylene blue was staining it. As soon as he added the methylene blue, he's watching this parasite die, and he realizes, I've just found my cure. That's how it was discovered.
That's amazing.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, it's like, let me stain it so I can find a solution. Well, I found the solution.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, we're done.
Wow, that's amazing.
So then that was where they discovered that methylene blue has an antimicrobial effect. And it's not just malaria, but like we were using it against COVID. And there's a friend of mine that was doing research on methylene blue in Mexico, and he discovered that you could eradicate COVID in 2 days if you combine it with light, like a certain spectrum of light, which is the real red light, which is at a 660 nanometer wavelength, right? And that's what most of these like red light panels or like red light saunas, they have a lot of this red light, because that red light is really healing for our body. Because remember we talked before about how the body can use electrons, but you can actually use photons within that system.
I don't recall the photon part, but it would make sense.
Yeah. So within the mitochondria, within that electron transport chain, electrons are moved.
Yeah.
But literally we have a component of that chain called the cytochrome C. Cyto meaning cell and chrome meaning light.
Okay.
So it's literally named after the fact that it can basically utilize light to make energy. And so the light comes in, and the light is basically pulled in by the methylene blue because it absorbs red, and that's what makes it blue, because it's reflecting blue, right? So it almost acts like a sponge to suck these photons into that mitochondria to kind of lubricate, to improve even more energy, right? So it can be really effective, not just as an antimicrobial, but as an overall brain boosting, body boosting, physical muscle boosting substance. So you should be able to lift more weight. You actually can make energy independent of oxygen with methylene blue. So your breath hold, your swimming, your athletic activity, you should be able to lift more at the gym. What does that mean? That means that you're able to push into a stress zone that would normally break you down, and harm you, and actually gain more net gain from that activity, and also mental emotionally, right? One really interesting study with methylene blue is with something called memory consolidation, right? So we're all really, really interested in evolving, right? We want to learn from what happens in our life and make sense of it and integrate that into our long-term memory base. So we have short-term experiences, right? And we've had some really beautiful experiences. Right?
Over the last few weeks. Yeah, it's been honestly crazy. I've had a lot of confirmations off theses I've had, and then I've had a lot of new paradigm shifts. But yeah. So going back to memory consolidation.
Yeah.
Short-term memory consolidation.
So there's some things that need to happen for us to be able to take that short-term memory and transfer it into our long-term memory base. And we actually store it, like there's a little thumb drive in your brainstem. Like we literally all have this little thumb drive that's storing our short-term memory throughout the day. And when we go to sleep, particularly in REM sleep, we transfer that data up to our upper brain centers, and it integrates in. So our short-term memory then integrates with our long-term memory. And this is where we make sense of things that happen to us. And this is where deep learning occurs. And what happens with a lot of people is that because of different situations with not having quality sleep, not having good, strong cellular energy, not having really good mitochondrial function, we don't create this memory consolidation. And so people develop PTSD, right? So post-traumatic stress means you've had a traumatic experience, but you can't make sense of it. And so you start
consolidate
looping. Right, you're not consolidating it.
Oh, that makes sense.
So they've done studies with phobia where people are exposed to something that they're afraid of. And they found that one dose of methylene blue, because it has such a profound improvement with memory consolidation, just one dose the day of the therapy improved these people's outcomes dramatically.
Wow.
So I think methylene blue is a really wonderful thing to take. You can take it daily, but for sure when you're involved with something where there's a lot of learning, you know, or like, you know, I think both of us may share some experience with plant medicine. Right?
100%.
And so for me, that's what changed everything. You know, it was a protocol called the Clarogenic protocol.
I haven't heard of it.
So it's about 3 different medicines.
Okay.
Right? Psilocybin's one of them.
Okay.
Ketamine's one of them.
Okay. We actually did we talk about it, right? Yeah. The protocol.
Yeah.
Go ahead. And what was your whole? You said awakening, or was it a paradigm shift? What occurred?
It's a great question. So I was invited to. So I grew up in Hawaii.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And like I did psilocybin when I was 12. Like we went and picked it. My buddies, like my parents had a High Time magazine. He read about it and like we're gonna go pick these mushrooms.
Yeah.
And my first mushroom trip was pretty crazy. It was a lot of laughing. It wasn't really an environment that was where you go inward, you know. And I think, you know, whether if you've had experience with psychedelics and you've done it with friends and you've had a great time and it's amazing, that's a totally different experience when you're laying down like on a bed or on a yoga mat with a mindful, you know, a mask on, listening to very specific music, where you're able to actually go inward and experience what's going on, not just in your unconscious, but the connection between the conscious and the unconscious, which oftentimes is very disconnected with people, right? And for me, there was a lot of data within the unconscious that was controlling the way, or it was dictating the filters in my unconscious were creating the way I was seeing reality, right? And that created a lot of limitations in my life. I didn't see my life as big as it really has become since then. And I didn't believe some of the insights that I had when I was in this journey, right? And I think that to make it simple, we have this sense of identity of who we are and who we are in relationship to the world, to the people in our life, to our career, you know, just to virtually everything. And there's a name that science gives that sense of identity. They call it the default mode network. And it literally exists in your brain in a very specific pattern, right? And we all have this sense of identity that's really just based on experiences that we've had, right? Relationships, things that basically happen to us. And there's these data points that we then create this basically false sense of like, this is Nate,
this
is John, and it's not you.
Correct.
It's not you at all. All it is just these data points.
Data points, you mean experiences or collected information? Or what do you mean?
Thought forms.
Oh, okay.
Right? Like, let's say that...
with like rational thought forms or emotional as well?
Both. Well, I'll give you an example. Like, so growing up in Hawaii, I was put in special education classes. So I was literally taking the short bus to school. You know, I was called retarded, you know, and this I took on this idea that I had a lot, I was different than other people, right? I was broken and I was stupid. And so these things were like ingrained in my mind as like John is like these things, right? But that obviously, here I am, fast forward, you know, 54 years old, and what I've accomplished, you know, I actually have people coming to me saying that they think I'm a genius, and I don't always take that on, you know, but it's a far reach from a kid that was picked up in a short bus taken to, you know, a retarded class when they were a child. But if I were to hang on to that sense of identity and I didn't drop that, I'd be stuck in that role as this retarded kid.
Blaming all the world, the circumstances, everybody else, which technically speaking, if there wasn't some sort of paradigm shift in your life where you decide, I'm not going to make a shift, a lot of people have had a lot of traumatic events, a lot of paralyzing events that anybody looking at it from the outside, they're like, yeah, that person has every right to cope and complain. Like, dude, he's got it rough. Like, that person's blind, that person's... So I agree with
and then
those
you get
limitations.
validated.
That,
right?
and then you
feel like you're somebody, right? You feel there's a sense of identity, and a lot of times we really root into that sense of identity because it feels good, right? And the reality is that if you can drop that identity, you can be whatever you want. Like it's an anchor, it's a ball and chain. And so dropping that default mode network is it's the primary reason that plant medicine and psychedelics allow people to make these massive shifts, because they're able to actually see themselves in a different way, and they can create whatever they want with their life.
Yeah. My whole experience, and I've done more than most people should ever do. But the best way I can explain it to somebody who, because it's like, it goes back to what you're saying with the strawberry. Like, if you've never tried a strawberry personally, I can try to convey, well, it can taste like this and that, or these two things combined, but if you don't try, you don't try. I believe it's the same exact way with these so-called plant medicines. I just look at it as inputs. Some inputs can be psychoactive, some inputs can be really bad for you, some inputs... And I come at it from that approach, but I feel the best way to describe it as an image would be going back to what you're saying. Let's say you live your life a certain way, patterns, thoughts, ideas, who you are, what the world around you is, and it keeps being ingrained in your system for years and years and years. It's kind of like you're on a snowy mountain and you're skiing the same slope, automata. When you do psilocybin, it's almost like the snow falls and you can take a new path, because like there's like a neural, and you notice a massive difference.
I love that analogy, because that default mode network is that trench, that track that you took in the snow, right? But to be able to get off of that would be to get out of your default mode network.
Fire.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, good stuff. But it's true, and I noticed it, and even from like a heroic dose, or even like my suggestion for people that ask me, hey, Nate, when it comes to plant medicine, my suggestion is it varies. It varies. What I like about it, it's that's one input. It's not a concoction of things. So like you can, a lot of things can occur. Now, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, financially, are you stressed out or not? If all these things are really bad and you're looking at this at a macro dose to solve these problems, I'm like, there's a possibility that everything could be amplified and even worse, right? I feel like the environment has to be good. The person who's with you, like there's a lot of factors that I'd be like, perfect, do it. But a lot of people, like I've seen dumb kids taking high levels of psilocybin, throwing pots, thinking they're catching Pokemon. But that's because they got the TikTok brain, out doing dumb stuff. So I feel like I think it's potentiated. That's just my opinion, because I've been around a lot of people, done it.
I call that noise.
Noise.
Right?
Why?
Well, because there's a clarity, right? There's like the true connection to source, right? So we can call it the divine, we can call it God. There's the quantum field, right? The morphogenic field. There is a energy that is creating everything, right?
I agree.
And I think all religions have one thing in common, is they recognize this. And we live in this three-dimensional where we have really, in essence, we have all of these moments, right? And these moments give this illusion that there's actually time, right?
Correct.
When you go into the quantum field, it's turned into a vertical, right? So everything that ever happened, everything that will happen, is all happening in one now moment. And so when people get into that really, really deep space, it can be fairly overwhelming, right? For me, it was a medicine called 5-MAO, which is from the bufo frog, and you actually inhale this.
Okay.
And it's about 10 or 15 minutes duration.
Short.
But
does it feel like it's longer when you're in it?
It feels like it's like an eternity, right? But make sure...
That's the caveat, right? That's what you have to tell people. Is like, it feels like an eternity, but it's 15 minutes.
Yeah. But like, you know, if you decide that you want to kind of go on this path, make sure that you find someone that's experienced. You don't want to do this with just anybody. But basically what happens is that you completely lose your ego. So the ego and sense of identity are one and the same, right?
Okay.
So a lot of times the word ego is brought out, and so it's that sense of identity. It's also that default mode network. So basically you get to experience death when you inhale this substance. They call it the God molecule as well. And so when that sense of identity is gone, the noise is gone, and so you have that deep connection with what's real, which is this this field that's creating everything. I know for some people first listening to this is going to sound really weird, right? And I know for me it was really hard for me to take it in and to understand it, and you really can't until you actually experience it. Words just don't give it enough context, right? But once you experience this, it's so life-changing, because you then realize that we're all connected to some level, right? And you feel such a deep sense of love for not only you, but for everybody and for everything. And ultimately, many people make huge changes in their life after they have these experiences. And people that are around them in their life, they're like, wow, he's really changed. He's more calm, he's more centered, he's more loving, he's more present. And these are all things that I think most anybody watching this would welcome into their life as well.
Could I ask you something? And this goes back to what we were discussing before with oxidative stress correlated with the proxy of potentiating or concocting or combining or sequencing or stacking plant medicine with methylene blue because of the antioxidant effect. My question is, there's a synergy there. Now,
the memory consolidation component is huge, right? And also the neuroprotective aspect can be really beautiful within plant medicine, different medicines, right? I wrote a book, and it's actually just an ebook. It's neuroprotection within plant medicine.
Oh, wow.
And this is available to our club members at mitozen.club.
Go check it out, guys. Totally worth it. Also, supplements are fire.
Yeah. So so you want to be careful with methylene blue within certain types of heart openers with like MDA, MDMA, because they work on serotonin. And methylene blue actually has large clinical trials on depression because of its effect with SSRIs. It acts like an SSRI. So that's one of the nice effects of taking methylene blue, is it actually uplifts your mood.
Yeah.
You know. But you don't want to take a very high dose at all when you're engaging in certain types of medicines that work on serotonin.
High dosage of methylene blue, or high dosage of the plant medicine combined with methylene blue, or don't combine them at all?
Well, so most experts would say don't combine them at all.
Yeah.
And I would argue that a small dose of possibly 10 or 20 milligrams, and then, you know, so the dosage with methylene blue is a 0.5 milligram per kilogram of body weight to about 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. But you wouldn't want to be on that higher end of that dosage schedule for, like, you know, most men 70 kilograms, 75, 80 kilograms.
Yeah.
And so that you're kind of in the neighborhood of about 300 milligrams or more of methylene blue, which is fine to take on a daily basis, but it's much higher than what you're going to read if you start searching, you know, online and you start looking at what other people have, because there's some bias on methylene blue based on there was some incidences where some people were they ran into some, you know, lethal problems with methylene blue that were on SSRIs. And this was a surgical procedure on a thymus gland. And so they came out with this warning saying, you know, don't combine SSRIs with methylene blue. And then they retracted it. Mayo Clinic came out and retracted it. And then, you know, our United States FDA has yet to retract that warning, but most other countries have. But when you look at, when you really look at that, what happened is was a really high dose of an infusion, which is an IV of methylene blue, that they were doing so that they could see the thymus gland, right?
Okay, yeah.
When because it was for people with thymus cancer.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it can be dangerous with high doses and SSRIs. So if you're on SSRIs, just be aware If you can read, you'll see some things that are going to be warnings with that. However, if you're on SSRIs, I think that it would be important to start talking to your doctor about getting off of them because they have a lot of negative effects on your ability to consolidate memory. In fact, we haven't really gotten into kind of finishing some of our conversations about that little thumb drive and moving the
Let's go back.
Because that thumb drive is called the locus coeruleus. You're going to love this.
Okay,
so
I haven't heard of this.
You think I'm the blue doctor. But like, the locus coeruleus means blue spot in Latin.
No way.
Right? And so we store our memories in the blue spot, and then that blue spot, in order for it to unload, the memories need a certain set of circumstances. One is it needs low serotonin, right?
Okay.
So SSRIs totally screw it up. Opiates really mess it up.
And we have an epidemic of that.
Alcohol totally screws it up. So if you know anybody that's an alcoholic, you realize they don't mature, right?
Oh, wow.
It's like this is a big problem. And the primary alcohol interferes with REM sleep big time. And REM sleep is the primary time where we're integrating. That's why the eyes are moving into all of these random eye movements. And this is part of the brain just kind of like integrating, you know, our short-term and our long-term memory.
And you know what's the curious thing about the eyes is sometimes you didn't realize you're doing it. Like if somebody records you or you're in a third person, you'll see yourself, what am I doing with my eyes? But when you're in person, it's almost like you're not really paying attention.
Yeah.
And you might be consolidating or doing...
Yeah, you see,
very cool.
There's saccades, right? The fast eye movements that we tested in the clinic.
Yeah. So let's go back. After you go back from, did you finish on the blue spot, or did you want to touch?
I think we'll probably circle back and forth to it, but yeah.
But let's go back to that. So what we did was the whole protocol was based on deficiencies, and my deficiency was a lot of it had to do with like looking down. Which you brought up, and you're like, yep. And I'm like, yeah, I had a strain when I was like looking down, and it was all correlated. So let's get into that, because that was actually fascinating.
Well, this really is kind of with some of the work I did with Dana White, and you know, I mean, anybody that kind of, if you want to go to my Instagram, you can see me working on Diplo, and like, you know, all these different, you know, celebrities and influencers. Recently did Marty Cove, you know, from Cobra Kai.
You noticed a massive difference?
Big time, yeah. So we, our eyes, the whites of our eyes actually have a connection to this fascia or this connective tissue that wraps around your brain and spinal cord. And that is called the dura mater, right? And in dura mater in Latin means tough mother. It's a mother because it's protecting, you know, your brain and spinal cord. And it's extremely tough. And what happens is, you know, we talked about Weston Price, and we talked about how the cranial structure like starts to contract. Well, these tissues become bound, and it holds the skull into that like contracted state, and it doesn't allow cerebral spinal fluid to flow around the brain and spinal cord, which carries nutrients, you know. And this is another thing that can prevent you from having that mental clarity and that brain optimization for you to achieve those like highest levels in your life, so your brain is really working properly. Well, cerebral spinal fluid is carrying nutrients and neurotransmitters, and it's also pulling toxins away. You know, you're either a swamp or a river, right? So you've either got flow or you got stagnation. Yeah. And so this connective tissue gets bound. The cranial structure collapses, you know, because when we're mouth breathers, it naturally allows these maxillary bones to fall in. And then the roof of the mouth comes up into the nasal airways like this, and then the teeth crowd, right? Kind of like a tent. Yeah. Right? And so now we have these restricted, collapsed airways. We're not getting air through our nose. When we're not breathing through our nose, it can affect our oxygen absorption by up to 30 or 40%. And so then that plays into the mitochondria and our ability to make energy. And I mean, it's like, you know, so we want to be able to breathe fully through our nose, right? Yeah. We want to have this flow of cerebral spinal fluid. Yeah. So what I discovered was that the eyes in certain directions start to tug on these restrictions, and then the eyes aren't able to do their job in these different fields of gaze. And this, I don't know how technical we want to get with this.
Let's
but
get technical.
Get really, really deep with some neurology.
I'm down.
Okay. So when your eyes your eyes basically, the three functional eye movements that we did with your eyes was gaze holding, so the ability to hold your gaze in one spot for a period of time, and then to be able to hold your gaze on a point while that point's in motion is called pursuit, right? And then there's something called a saccade, which is the eye moving from one point to another, right? And you see people making these fast eye movements all the time. It's just natural. And the reason that these are happening is that we're building maps of our environment, and it's updating as to where your body is in relationship to the environment. And so whether you're at the gym and you're trying to like kind of assess where the weights are, or you're out in the football field and you're running and you're turning around to catch a football, or you're just walking in the park, right? So when your eyes are not functioning properly in these three abilities, we're not able to update our maps. There's actually the medical name for that is a collicular map or somatotopic map, right? And so retinotopic maps are made with the eyes, and they are what create our somatotopic maps. So it makes sense because we have to see our environment, we see our body, we make these relationships. Without that, it doesn't happen. And so when we don't have those maps really clear, it's a lot like if we had one of those old cameras that have a slow shutter, you know, and it smears. Those automatic cameras. I forget the name of them.
I don't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves. Like, you guys don't have to worry about that with the.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with an iPhone.
Yeah, I gotcha.
They didn't bought us at a young age.
Right.
We got to enjoy nature.
But basically, these cameras, the shutter would open and the light would be shining, and if something was in motion, that light would smear. And so that happens with the brain too, as we get a smearing of these maps. So the maps aren't really concise. And what that means is that, let's say you're working out, well, you might actually strain your shoulder because you're not really holding your shoulder in the most optimal position to do that exercise, right? And so then you get an injury, then you can't work out for a week or two, you know, possibly even more.
Longer,
right?
Yeah.
And that's when you got to come to me instead of going to a surgeon, so we can do stem cells and fix the shoulder joint.
10 out of 10.
Yeah, and the rotator cuff. But yeah, having that fine precision with the muscles and your joints has an impact from the eyes. And so a lot of people, I can test them and see if their eyes in a certain position aren't functioning. And so like with you, I had you looking down and you couldn't hold your arm.
Yeah.
But I could be testing any muscle.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a weakness. So why are you weak with your eyes down is because it's like totally shutting your brain down.
Huh. Is that for everybody, like looking down is a sign of shutting down, or is it does it depend on the person?
No, it's different directions.
That's what I thought.
Sometimes people don't have any weakness looking in neutral, right?
Yeah.
Because the fascia isn't really super restricted.
Yeah.
I'll actually have to move their head into different positions, and then they move their eyes.
And then
so if you think about, like, you look at my shirt, right? So like if I bend to the left, I'm stretching over here.
Yeah.
You know, if I bend backward, it's stretching in the front. And so the dura is like a sleeve, right?
Yeah.
And so if you start to bend in certain directions and that restriction's happening in that dura on the opposite side, then it's going to create that weakness. So we actually hold you in that position when we do the balloons. And that's why I have you to stick the tongue out, because I'm like taking that dura to its maximum stress point.
Yeah.
And then the balloon, as it's traveling back towards the throat, releases that adhesion.
Yeah.
Then we stand you up, retest you, the eyes move, and there's like a fluidity of those.
The best way it was saying is like ease of motion. So guys, this is more or less what happened from my point of view. So I come into the office, they're like, we're gonna do this thing, track your device, your eyes, everything. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm there doing all the testing, the tracking, and then as I'm looking down, I noticed just like, oh, it's hard to look down in terms of like being intentional, right? And doing it fast. I'm like, it's harder. I felt a strain. And then Dr. John comes out and he's like looking at tests. He's like, yeah, you're weak looking down. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, wait, how does he know? And he's like, based on how the eye and the movement and how it was, what was it? Is it the separation from the actual dot was lagging? So I was like, he's like, let's do a strength test. And the whole thing was like, if you look down, you're going to lose strength. And I'm like, what is he even talking about? So I stand up and I put my arm out and I probably use 75% strength. He pushes down and my arm doesn't go down. He's like, then look up. The arm doesn't go down. He's then like look down. And I like look down, but then look down with my eyes as well. And instantly you put my arm down. And I was like, wait, what? So I'm like, okay, let's do it again. Because I'm like, no. I tell you, I'm like, let's do it again. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait, let's do it again. So this time I did like 50%. And I remember you pushed down, you couldn't do it. Then I looked up, you couldn't do it. And then when you push down again, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna actually go hard. And even I pushed you up, but there was no balance. It was a wobble. Because it wasn't that I held it up. I was like,
yeah, there's no locking.
No locking. Then even
that's that deep command of the muscle where you can lock it in.
Yeah. And it's crucial for like lifting and everything. Movement.
Yeah. Because when you lose that locking mechanism, all of a sudden the joint destabilizes.
Yeah.
Right. And so when the muscles lose their robustness, then all of a sudden you're hanging on ligaments, and ligaments are really dense, right? So when you injure a ligament, you got a problem because there's not a lot of blood supply to those ligaments, or like the tendons, which are the tendon attachments. And so that whole bring in the groceries, take out the garbage, type of thing, that circulation that's important. When we injure those connective tissues, 75% they never heal. So you're basically left with a permanent injury when you're not having that robust muscle strength, right? And that's the problem with lifting really heavy weights. I'm more of a fan.
How much do you bench, bro?
I'm more of a fan of slow.
Yeah.
So like we actually had a super slow zone franchise, which is was a fitness center, and this is based on Hutchins, right? And Hutchins was the one that developed the Nautilus equipment, right?
Okay.
And so after he developed that, he went on to do research where he found that if you do a slow set, really slow to complete failure, 1 time a week, you got more benefit than if you spent hours and hours at the gym. Because all you need to do is just maximally stimulate that muscle to the point of like, you're making it adapt to the stress, right? And then when you go in and you do multiple sets and you're spending a lot of time at the gym, you're actually overstressing all those ligaments. You're overstressing the joints. You're stressing the cartilage, and it's unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
Now, a way that you can even take that the next step is you do something called blood flow restriction training, right? So I'm a fan of putting the blood flow restriction on and then doing a slow set, right? And I can do a pretty robust workout in 20 minutes.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
With whether it's machines or free weights. But basically you want to be going slow so that about at the 3-minute mark you hit your failure zone.
Oh wow.
So that's how you set the weight. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So for the 3-minute, is it nonstop, or are you doing like rest pause training?
So that's a good point. So you basically, there's no pause at any point. You're keeping that weight going nice and smooth for that full time.
Very cool.
And it's not easy.
It's not.
I mean, it's really, especially if you don't have somebody sitting there that you're, that's watching you, and you're like, I can't like cheat or whatever.
Can I say something? Because this whole like train till failure, Mike Menser, like the if you start studying like the whole thesis behind it, it's intrinsically smart, right? Like there has to be periods of destruction and there has to be periods of restoration, healing. First of all, people are couch potatoes. They're not really healing their muscles. And then people aren't trained till failure.
No.
Like people think they're training till failure.
It's painful. It's suffering.
Yeah. Like I see guys at the gym, I train till failure. Mike Menser, I'm like looking at him like, did you see him? Like he had somebody spotting him, like, but he was lifting a lot heavier. And that goes back to what I was trying to convey. Bands, lightweight, combination of bands with lightweight restriction. I feel like those are all ways of keeping the same component or the structure or the thesis of destruction till failure, but you're avoiding or mitigating potentially getting injured, like a wrist, elbow, because you're doing tons of weight.
Yeah.
Right? Because your failure's like, but then what? You're doing momentum, everything. I'm like, I feel like that's a more advanced technique, in my opinion. I feel like most people should train till failure with lower weight, get in the rhythm, mental mindset, and then move on. Everyone's like, yeah, I want to train like Mike Menser. I'm like, you live a sedentary lifestyle. You're always forward. You have terrible elbow. You have terrible shoulder. Zero rotator. Like, why are you even?
But the thing is, you go to the gym, you'll never see somebody training like this. Like, it's not our culture.
No.
Right. So you'd be the only one at the gym with probably bands on.
Yeah.
The only one that's just doing one set with lighter weights.
Yeah.
And you're going to be the smartest person in the gym actually, because you could be 80, 100 years old, and you're not going to be riddled with arthritis like these other people are.
Correct.
You know, I had to learn this because I got so sick at one point in my 30s with Lyme disease and mold illness. It just about killed me.
Oof.
And it went septic into my joints. Yeah. So I had to learn a way of, because I wanted to still have muscle mass and be healthy.
Dang.
You know, but, and so what I learned from that process is that, you know, at one point I was close to 200 pounds.
Oh, wow.
With just doing this exercise.
Wow.
Like with almost 0% body fat.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can get really stacked, really ripped with this. So, you know, I would say that my recipe for someone having like an incredible physique would be minimize your stress in the sense of cortisol. Like we should talk about cortisol because cortisol is what inhibits our ability to be androgenic. Yeah.
Let's get into that.
Yeah. So cortisol is your biggest headwind to growing muscle. Cortisol is what's called catabolic. So you have catabolic and anabolic. Right? And so cortisol is very destructive for that. So that's why there's ashwagandha is an herb that I really love to use, and you can get it in tinctures or pills, and it actually inhibits cortisol a little bit, and it's a wonderful substance to take for bodybuilding. Actually.
Do you think it's long-term or cycling it, ashwagandha? Because
you can take it long-term. Yeah.
High dosages or low dosages or no? Because I've heard people with the whole like it affecting their mood or the way they feel, or like I've heard it from a couple people that have taken it a little higher levels over long periods of time.
Well, did you know most anabolic steroids have their benefit by blocking cortisol? That's how they work.
Well, it goes back to what you're saying. If that's what makes it makes total sense. Yeah. So you might as well just do IV ashwagandha. Is that where the community
well, think about
crystallized patches,
things that activate stress. So the cortisol is something that gets us up in the morning. It's something that our adrenals release when we have a stress demand, right?
Yeah.
And if you're working out in the gym an hour, 2 hours, you know, every day, like think about all the cortisol you're producing, right? So if you can get that same signal to the muscle without all that compounded cortisol, then you might not, you know, even let's say that you're juicing. Let's say that, you know, you're taking anabolic steroids, right? Well, you could probably take a whole lot less, right? Because you're not having to have that influence on that cortisol as much. And that's going to be a lot safer as well.
Yeah. I think that's, so your suggestion would be somebody reduce the amount of steroids they're taking and start introducing ashwagandha?
Yes, and
very cool. I haven't heard of this before.
And exercising less.
Yeah, I agree with the exercising less.
Which is hard too, because you think about like I'm gonna put myself in somebody's shoes that's gonna start a stack, right? I'm gonna be like, oh my God, I'm gonna like just crush the gym. I'm gonna go, and it's exact opposite, you know, of what might be the best track forward, because when you start taking these performance enhancing substances, you start to gain a lot of strength. And the problem is, whether you're in the gym lifting really heavy weights, you're going to injure yourself, right? Or if you're in there doing a lot of exercise, you get a repetitive stress injury.
Is it because it gives you extra strength, but your ligaments, your tendons,
they
can't handle
haven't adapted yet, right? Especially in the beginning when you first start taking something. But
that makes sense.
But you can accomplish a lot of this without these medicines, you know. And there's natural things that you can take. There's, you know, maca and tribulus and some of these like actually they stimulate testosterone through your pituitary gland, right? And so it's through something called luteinizing hormone, right? So luteinizing hormone actually triggers you to produce your own testosterone, right? And that's kind of how it works with a lot of your hormones, is that there's like a master control, and then there's the hormones, and there's like a negative feedback loop. When one goes high, the other one goes low, and it's kind of vice versa. So
is that because it's trying to self-regulate homeostasis or something?
It's how we self-regulate, yeah. So it's ultimately better to take, like if you take testosterone, what's going to happen is your luteinizing hormone is going to go way down. So your signaling to produce testosterone is going to go down because your body's saying, hey, I don't need to like signal that as much because you already have enough. And then therefore your gonads start to wither away, you know, and stop producing testosterone. And then you're left with like degenerated, you know, glands, and you're not able to produce testosterone. Where the old school method with people that are utilizing, whether they're anabolic or even just going on testosterone replacement therapy, is to take something that activates luteinizing hormone so that it keeps your gonads activated, so that when you go off of it, you're not left with these degenerated, you know, glands.
What's your take on testosterone? Because once you kind of get on it, you get on it at an older age. Do you think it's a good thing, or do you think you should try to go as natural as possible till there's no other alternative as you get older, or avoid it at all costs, or do it when you're young?
So I'm a bit biased because in my late 30s I went on testosterone replacement therapy, and you know, honestly, like here it is 20 years later, and I don't take a lot, and I haven't, like, normally people have to take more and more and more as they get older. But because I've utilized a lot of the herbs and I've taken care of myself, you know, I haven't put myself in that situation. But I do think that some people, if they've had, so, you know, not only did I have Lyme, but like something really interesting is like, if you've been watching the news, you see this Camp Lejeune thing where they're looking for people that were on this base and they have an injury. And so my mother was in utero, so she was pregnant with me, and then my first 2 years of life were on Camp Lejeune on this military base, and it was the largest water contamination in U.S. history. So this huge lawsuits, right? And a lot of kids were stillborn. I'm really lucky to be alive, but I've had a lot of challenges, you know, more so than the average person with my health. And so I think part of that has shown up with needing to go on testosterone replacement therapy.
But it was beneficial? You noticed a difference?
Been total game changer.
Cool. That's what's up. Yeah, I've always like thought of it. Like I always tell, like my whole take on it has been like avoid it as much as possible till it's like the last solution. But I don't like, put it on the same thing as PEDs, or say, because everybody like tries to group every injectable together. I'm like, it's all completely different.
Well, there's also probably people listening to this that might be dealing with a chronic disease, which most Americans now are, and that's why hopefully we get some political changes going on here with RFK, Trump, you know. But so most of you watching this have some sort of chronic disease, whether it's an autoimmune, a gut issue, something like that. And it's very difficult for these things to be repaired, from my perspective, in functional medicine without balancing the hormones.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So you need a doctor that knows what they're doing. They can test your hormones. They can balance it. There's a lot of natural ways to do it with herbs and with lifestyle, with diet. You know.
Do you think also light plays a huge thing, going back to what we were talking about before?
Well,
like
there's studies showing that red light on your balls basically like improves testosterone.
I do red light.
Yeah. When the root chakra, like we've got that photon or the Mitochondria palm. I'll put that right on my perineum while I'm watching TV. There is a significant like experiential experience on my vitality by doing that, because your root, like you have chakras, you have energy centers, you know? And that's where we get like most of the energy, like really comes from that root, and it's earth energy is what it's really called. And so that earth energy originates from that root chakra, and when that root chakra is really active, like an acupoint chakra that allows the flow of energy.
Correct.
So this is like our body should be free flowing with energy, and we get stuck, and we get areas that life force isn't fully flowing through. And these areas that we want to kind of allow that life force to flow through can be treated with light, and that's one of the really amazing benefits, is it just allows that energy to flow through.
And people out here doing chicken and rice with microwaves, thinking that, this is going to give me energy, because it's all correlated with like food. Like that's what I tell people. It's like, I'm not saying go full breatharian, right, or whatever, but like you can get energy from other sources. So my whole thing is like, if you can become metabolically flexible, if you can tap into fat, like where your brain doesn't go haywire, like I need sugar, and you can operate a fat, and you have enough fat for your brain to operate off, and then you start fasting and start tapping into light and everything, you realize, oh, I'm getting energized off of this. Like, this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, so ketones are another fuel source. And so if you're not ever either doing a keto diet or if you're fasting, and if you really suffer with fasting where you just get like famished and you just have to eat, and it's like your blood sugar, or if you've got diabetic types of things going on, and that means that you're not metabolically flexible, which means that your body can't utilize ketones, because when you're in a fasted state, if there's no food at all available, we start to pull energy out of our fat storages. Yeah. And this is also a really nice little clue for anybody that's looking to like really rip out and they want to like get the six pack or just lose some weight in general, is if your body doesn't look at fat as a fuel source, then that's a problem. Then it's basically going to like build more and more fat. Right?
Correct.
But if you want to burn that fat, you have to teach your body to use that fat as an energy, and that's where ketosis comes into play, and that's where fasting, intermittent fasting. I'm a big fan of prolonged fast, 3, 5, 7 day fast. Yeah. If you really want to like jumpstart losing weight and getting ripped, I would highly recommend doing a prolonged fast. Same. Doing it once a month for 3 months straight. That would be like the ideal, right? Even if it's just 3 days, it's fine. But you know, once you get to that 3 days, it's not too hard to hit the 5, because it's the first 2 days that are rough.
I agree. What's your whole, like, what I tell people I like doing are fasts within fasts. So like I'll do a fast for autophagy and push it as much as possible, like set a new PR or whatever, like trying to push it. And then I'll start introducing like juices or everything. So I'm not fasting from a caloric intake. I'm fasting from a caloric intake via the mechanism of chewing food and absorption. So I'm giving my body a break. So it's like a liquid state, and I'll go days and days fasting that. And then once I'm like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit too cold, like I'll start doing bone broths, a lot of healthy fats, proteins. Because the first thing I tell my body is like, okay, if you go on a fast, right? So if you're trying to be a loyal guy, right? And you don't want to cheat on your girl, you're not going to go to the club at night and party, right? You're going to do the opposite thing. Same thing with your body. If you don't want to cheat your body and you want your body to become metabolically flexible, the last thing you do is introduce hyperpalatable foods after your fast. Like people are like, oh, I deserve to eat a bag of chips now. Or no, motherfucker, you're trying to get away from that. Like, it's like, and I see people like, yeah, bro, I broke my fast. Now I'm like, okay, you broke your fast. What are you introducing? Like, you have to like, not trick the brain, but like show the brain like, this is what we're doing now. And let the brain kind of adapt.
Yeah, that's true. You know, it's basically you're taking through an education, you're taking your metabolism through an education, you're showing it, hey, this is a great way to get energy. And what's really, when you look at like how we evolved, right? When we were hunting and we were starving. Yeah. I mean, we didn't have the availability to store stuff in a refrigerator back in the day. You know, we ate that animal, we killed that animal, we ate it, we might dry some things up, we might do some things where we're storing some food. But for the most part, you know, we're out there killing the animal, and we're from meal to meal, and sometimes it might be a month or more between meals. Yeah. And so we have this feast or famine type of situation that we don't enjoy these days, and it is quite a bit of suffering when you're fasting, right? And there's, you know, it's kind of dawned on me how many aspects of some of the really key ways to stay healthy and kickstart your metabolism and be ripped and be healthy have a suffering component to it. Yeah. You know, whether it might be fasting or cold therapy, saunas.
Suffering is always in the equation, guys.
Yeah. And even doing some of the work we were talking about with whether it's psychedelics or non-psychedelics, it's like looking at shit we don't want to look at. Yeah. Right? There's so many aspects of going into what's uncomfortable, right? But being comfortable with discomfort, right? So the amount of discomfort that one can comfortably live with is going to correlate to the quality of their life.
I agree. And you know what that is? But the beauty of that is those are stressors that if one overcomes, it elevates your life. But the truth is the stressors are there. So my whole take is tell people eliminate the stressors that are not going to take you to the next level. And this goes to the food. Like, you having metabolic inflexibility, you having rancid seed oils, inflammation in your body, that's all obstacles you have to overcome, and it's going to be there. And if you don't do it, it's going to hinder you. So like, it's always going to be there. It's just like, make your baseline, make your health so good that when you do tackle these things, they don't seem insurmountable. Like, you as a young kid, as a 12, 15-year-old, had to deal with some of the problems you deal with now. You probably wouldn't have been able to handle it. Not only how smart you are, how much money you have, relationships, it's just your baseline, inflammation, gut. Because I remember I used to be not rational, super emotional, super reactive, and a lot of it was all the inputs.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Honestly, fascinating. So what made you go from like a young kid who they said was, did you feel like you had issues learning, or do you feel like it was just labels and you kind of just went along with it? Because I feel like for me, when I had bad food, bad lifestyle, like I had brain fog. Like I would read 2 pages of a book and I don't remember what I read.
You know, maybe there's no bad students, they're just bad teachers.
Yeah.
There's bad education systems, right? There's a lack of support. I mean, I was addicted to sugar. I used to eat, I wasn't happy with the amount of sugar I put in my cereal unless my spoon would sit straight up, right? I mean, there was like a layer about an inch thick of sugar, you know? And so this is what we had no idea, right? And I know for sure, like my nose was always running as a kid. I remember when I would eat, I would be like hawking up and my dad would just be so angry at me.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I'm suffering because like, I'm just wanting to get rid of this like loogie that's sitting there and I'm eating, right? And it's
like if you could
I
get rid of it, you would get rid of it. Yeah.
You know, it was miserable. So I know how unhealthy my diet was. I know that I was having outgassing of endotoxins through my nasal passage. I had brain fog. I wasn't a dumb kid, right? But I wasn't supported, right? And so I wish I could go back in time and have the support that I could offer myself now, right? And maybe a lot of you guys are actually able to support your kids, or like maybe you're in your 20s or 30s. Like some of this stuff, maybe even go back and watch this a second time because there are some like deep gems. And like, I know that we're not getting in super deep with everything that we're talking about, but make some notes and start going onto Google and maybe searching some of these things and like taking some dives into this stuff. Yeah. I've got just a ton of podcasts that I've done out there. I know you have as well. Yeah. And just make this a decision for you to like really understand this to the point where you can start to make some changes in your life. One thing that I think is an amazing, that came to me is we talked about this, testosterone, right? Anabolic and cortisol. Yeah. And there's this this aspect of caffeine that really ramps up cortisol, right? Okay. And did you know caffeine is a herbicide that plants produce to repel insects?
I was aware of it, and I'm aware that that's a discussion as to why people say you shouldn't drink coffee. Do you think that's a viable thing, or do you think it varies from grain to grain? What's your whole take on that?
Well, I think that a lot
of... I mean, not grain, bean, coffee bean.
The coffee bean? Well, there's a lot of antioxidants in coffee bean. I don't think the caffeine is a lot different in a coffee bean versus like a lot of energy drinks. Yeah. But a friend of mine, Sean Wells, right? You can look him up. They call him the world's greatest formulator. Right? Okay. And Sean was looking at this tea in China, and they found that like these kids like had accelerated learning, and there was just all these like amazing benefits and longevity when they would drink this tea. And they found that the tea had a substance called paraxanthine. Okay. And so then they went and further studied, and they found that there's 3 metabolites of caffeine. There's theobromine, theophylline, and paraxanthine, right? And when they got rid of the other 2 and they just left the paraxanthine, you would get all of the jazz without the frazzle of caffeine. This is kind of what I like to say. Yeah. So in other words, paraxanthine could be a really good option for energy for people, especially if they're on a track to try and build muscle, if they're looking to be more anabolic, without activating all that cortisol, which is going to then inhibit your ability to make and grow muscle, right? My experience with paraxanthine has been absolutely like a complete game changer. Like it's been, it's the most clear energy that I've ever had in my life, right? I can sleep. The studies on it show that you can take it even like in the evening. Its act cuts off 3 to 4 hours. They found that when you take it, it enhances learning and neuroplasticity, mostly because it doesn't have that action with the cortisol. So at night, if your cortisol, we didn't kind of get into the blue spot, the fact that cortisol, just like opiates or alcohol or SSRIs inhibit memory consolidation, cortisol also does.
Oh.
Yeah. So we came out with a product called Satori that has paraxanthin in it. And
I've been taking it. I noticed a difference.
Yeah. Love it.
And I heard a whole thing is like, oh, well, you don't really feel paraxanthin if you're addicted to caffeine. But I still have noticed a difference on it. My question for you is, can you bypass cortisol levels with coffee if you add like fats or lipids like butter or all that? Like, I know like there's a trigger or caffeine delay in terms of like feeling the spike. Would it be the same with the cortisol or no?
Yeah, I think anything that's going to slow down absorption in the stomach and the digestive tract is going to be beneficial, because if you have a quick release of caffeine, you know, it's going to be like, oh, you know. So slower release can be good, but you're still going to run into some of the challenges with, you know, the cortisol. So
what was the name of the leaf that they're doing? Because I might add that to my Shredder gourd. Try it out. Do you remember from China? You said where they're studying, that they got the molecule from.
You know, I don't.
We're gonna have to find that out,
because
I'm down to try
it for you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I tell people, like, especially, and because I see a lot of people that are like, yeah, I don't drink coffee and I feel down and whatever, I'm like, try these substances as alternatives and you'll notice clarity.
Yeah, but I love that stack for people, like some ashwagandha, and then you switching from, like, you know, the worst thing you could be doing is like Red Bull or Monster energy
I agree.
drinks, you know,
especially with all the dyes, with all the chemicals. And
I'm a big fan of matcha. You talk about
I
Japanese
love matcha.
culture.
I love
matcha. Both of us kind of rock a little bit of that.
I mean, it's just, I feel like they have a lot of wisdom to impart that Western societies completely like neglect or think it's.
Well, they're not afraid to suffer a little bit.
Correct.
In order to be more higher level, right? So like, you know, for a lot of us to sit there and learn how to do a tea ceremony with all of the, like, it would be super boring. It would be like, oh my God, I have to suffer through learning that and that being so bored. But what they find is that they're dropping into what we talked about, that now moment, right? And just being in like the present moment. There's a bliss that happens because you're connected to that divine. Once you learn how to connect at that deeper level, some of these things can be really amazing, you know, that we now feel as being boring.
Yeah.
You know, because we're actually connecting with, we're not distracted, right? We talked about noise earlier.
Yeah.
Right? We were sitting and having dinner. I don't know if it was you or Ocean Eagle pointed out, there was a family.
He pointed out. Yeah.
The kid was on an iPad, right? And then the mom and dad were both on phones, totally distracted.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the way that we're all living. I'm guilty of it too.
Well,
I get a spare moment. I'm on my Instagram, you know, commenting or liking or whatever, because, you know, this is something I'm trying to keep up with, right?
Yeah.
And I like the way that it's called Shabbat. It's what religion is that? The
Hebrews, Jewish people?
Jewish,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. So in the Jewish tradition, there's a day of Shabbat where you're taking away from technology, right? They also recommend that you don't engage in talking about business or anything serious. You know, it's just a day to take a break, right? And I have a lot of friends that are Jewish, and they partake in this, and, you know, taking like a holiday from technology can be a really, really good idea.
So you know what it is? And this is a realization I've had. We've gone from a society that's connected to hyper-connected, and then people, consciousness, what they pursue is dopamine, fast dopamine, instead of being present in the moment. That's why a ceremony can look like it's super boring.
Lonnie.
Hey.
Come here, Lon. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come on.
Got the blue eyes as well.
Oh, look at this face, huh? Look at that face. Oh.
So, To wrap things up a little bit for our audience, what are some words of advice that you would give them for somebody who's on their journey? They just come across all these new data sets. I agree with what you're saying in terms of like take action, dive down the rabbit hole, start reading his books, start looking at the podcast, and start doing your own research in terms of each topic. Besides that, what's another like one piece of advice you would leave?
Well, I would say look at
to
your
our
life
travelers?
in like a pie, right? And like different slices of the pie are going to relate to different aspects of you, right? Like there's mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, right? And so all of these points are going to have like you can rate them. You can sit there and say like 1 to 100, like where is that for me? Like my career, right? Like where are you at professionally? Like where are you at with like your mental mind? Like how clear you feel, how precise you feel that you can be with communicating ideas with people, how effective you are with relationships and business. Your physical body, right? How happy are you with your physical body? You know, rating that. So like starting to look at all of these aspects of your life, and then kind of consider where you want to go. You know, what do you want to spend some time improving? Don't feel like you have to do it overnight.
Yeah.
But just understand where you're starting from, and start to formulate a game plan based on what you're wanting to accomplish. And don't let this episode of this show be your first exposure to this. We've been talking about some things that are not commonly talked about.
No.
Like you can go and listen to podcasts and shows forever, and we are like going into some more real depth of what's really happening, because when you start to fix your body at this core energy level, when we talked about the mitochondria, just remember the body has an innate intelligence to function at its ideal.
It has a consciousness, I think, or a subconsciousness.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right? So it knows, right? But what happens is that when we lose that ability to make energy, things start to go wrong. You know, the word disease, dis-ease, it's a lack of ease in the body, right? And when disease is present for a long enough period of time, you get cancer, right? And that's happening with kids nowadays. You know, I mean, if you think you're immune to coming down with cancer, I mean, it's becoming a real problem. So we don't want to have disease. We want to be at our physical peak, our mental peak, our spiritual peak, our career. You want all those to happen. Don't put too much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
You know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know.
Yeah.
And just stay focused on some of the most important aspects of it. Be curious. Stay curious. Do not accept what society and culture is telling you, because in fact, I would say look around at what everyone else is doing and do the freaking opposite. And you're probably going to be pretty right on.
Yeah, I agree. I must concur to agree. Well, thank you for your words of wisdom. It was a pleasure having you on. And guys, in my opinion, there's valuable information out there. You just have to find the right people, ask the right questions, be curious. And I'll see you guys at the top of the mountain. Peace.
Peace.